that is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she builds planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mugar Omni Theater at the Museum of Science, Boston, and our very special screening of SPACE TORAH, presented by the Boston Jewish Film Festival. I'm James Monroe. I'm the producer of adult programs and theater experiences here at the museum, and I'm really excited to be introducing and starting this wonderful evening. I'm also thrilled to be standing here in front of a live, in-person audience in the Omni Theater. Yes, give yourselves a hand. We made it back. You all are an at-capacity audience for what we can have safely in here tonight and keep you all socially distanced. You're all fully masked. We'll ask you to leave those on the entire time you're in the building. And you're a safe enough distance away from us here on stage, so it's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for coming. I'm also thrilled because tonight we're able to collaborate with our friends at Boston Jewish Film as part of their ongoing festival with this screening of this incredible film, SPACE TORAH, and the really wonderful panel conversation that we have in store for you later, which you'll hear more about in a moment. So it's just a really wonderful evening, lots of great things in store. I want to thank everyone involved in the film and the festival for allowing us to be a part of this here at the museum. And tonight is just a part of our current fall season of adult programming here at the museum. There's still some great stuff still to come now through December. So I encourage you to check out our full lineup and grab your tickets by going to our website at mos.org/adults, or you can pick up our season mailer on your way out tonight. A little bit later on, after the panel conversation, our speakers will have a chance to take some of your questions. So if you have a question at any time, you can go to the website right above me, and you just go to slido.com, or you can scan the QR code on your smartphone. This is the Museum of Science. We're embracing technology here. And you just enter the code SPACE TORAH, all one word, just as it appears on the screen above me, and they'll get through a bunch of those a little bit later on. This screen will also pop up during the conversation, so you have that address the whole time as well. I need to thank our friends from the Lowell Institute for their ongoing support of the adult programming and helping to make tonight possible. Huge thanks to them. And just some few final announcements at the end of the program. And if you do have to leave the program early for any reason, we ask you to exit by going up the steps and through the exit in the rear of the theater only. Please do not try to walk down the stairs. This is for your safety. But we recommend just sitting back, relaxing, and enjoying this really incredible and inspiring film. But now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage the executive director of Boston Jewish Film, Susan Adler.
Thank you so much, James. It has been really a pleasure to work with you and everyone at the Museum of Science. I want to welcome everyone to this screening of SPACE TORAH at the 33rd Annual Boston Jewish Film Festival. We are so excited to have an in-person event and have each of you here. We're grateful to everybody who has supported us and to our fabulous Boston Jewish Film team and board of directors that makes everything we do possible. This is really a match made in heaven to have this fabulous film premiere of SPACE TORAH at the Omni with local connections. We couldn't have made this up and had it be better. So we're thrilled that you're all here. This filming will be followed by a fabulous panel discussion that will be moderated by Paula Apsell, who is the CEO of Leading Edge Productions and the former senior executive producer of Nova. And it is now my pleasure to introduce you to the executive producer of SPACE TORAH, Rachel Raz. I hope you enjoy the screening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Can I hear you back? Woo! It's so great to be here in person. I was thinking about this moment for probably 2 years, and we are finally here, so it's wonderful to be here. In 2016, not too far from here, I was sitting in the audience like you, and I heard Jeff Hoffman for the first time. And he shared with us beautiful videos from space, some photos, and he shared with us his journey over 5 space missions. The entire time I was sitting there and thinking about 2 things. One, How come I don't know about this story? Fabulous American story about the American dream as a kid thinking about something big and achieving it with the help of parents, educators, and others. And also it's a wonderful story of humanity, thinking our traditions, our culture, wherever we go. And it's also a Jewish story. It has definitely a big part of a Jewish story. But the second thing that I was thinking about as an educator, about all of the elements in his story that are so important and can generate very meaningful conversation with children, with parents, with educators, with spiritual leaders, and the wider community. So here we are, 5 years after, with this wonderful film. But I have to also give a big shout out to our production team led by Rob Cooper, our director from Verissima Production. So if you can see him, Rob, you can say hi, you will see him. And all the people, we have several people from our production team here today. So if you're there, raise your hand so we can acknowledge you. Some of them are not here. I also want to give a big shout out to all of our supporters, and I have to start with my husband Gil, that when I came home after this talk, and I said to him, what are we doing? And he said, just go for it. And my daughter and many other people that gave money for the film, that we are all here today. So I want to thank you all. Jeff's story is it's a story about a community effort that create wonderful things. The story of the film is also a story of community, of all of the people that came together to make it. And now I want to invite you to buckle up and join me for Out of This World journey. So enjoy Space Torah.
So I think I'm supposed to be joined by Jeff and Rob. So I'm Paula Apsell. I have to say, I think that's just an awesome film. And awesome is a really good word for it. And so congratulations to everyone who was involved in it. It's just a beautiful film. And I've seen it already about 5 times, so when you like something after 5 times, it's really good. So here I am joined by the filmmaker and the astronaut, and that'd be the good title for the book, The Filmmaker and the Astronaut. And let me introduce them to you, although of course we already know Jeff, but Rob Cooper is kind of the man behind the scenes. So he's been producing documentaries and educational films and television shows for over 40 years. And his directing credits include Good Morning Blues, hosted by B.B. King, which was awarded a Cine International Golden Eagle, which is a very great award. And he's won several New England Emmys for his work as a producer at WBZ-TV. And for the past 20 years, Rob and his partner, Pam Cooper, have worked together at Verissima Productions, creating historical documentaries such as Zamir, Jewish Voices, Return to Poland, which aired nationally on PBS, and biographies including one of the artists, Samuel Bach, who was profiled in The Art of Speaking About the Unspeakable. So Dr. Jeff Hoffman, whom we've just seen, has a PhD in astrophysics from Harvard. And as a NASA astronaut, he's made 5 space flights, including the first astronaut to log 1,000 hours of flight time aboard the space shuttle. He's performed, as we were told, 4 spacewalks, including the initial repair mission for the Hubble Space Telescope. And following his time as an astronaut, Dr. Hoffman spent 4 years as NASA's European representative at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. That must have been really rough, Jeff.
It was a tough job.
And a professor at MIT, he's currently deputy principal investigator of the MOXIE experiment on the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. And in 2007, Dr. Hoffman was elected to the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. So 2 amazing people. Rob, I'm going to start with you. First, I want to congratulate you on this really wonderful, beautiful film. And then I'd really like to know, when Rachel approached you about the film, did you know right away that you wanted to make it? What drew you to it? And did you have a specific vision in mind right away, or was it something that you really had to find?
Well, answering the second part of the question first, it was not so much a vision as it was that we knew the very concept of reading a Torah in space was mind-boggling, and we figured there would be a way to build a film around that. And then later we found out that Jeff had been one of the key people to fix the Hubble telescope. And then later we found out that when he finished, it was Hanukkah, and there was this whole amazing thing with the dreidel. And then Raquel was pushing that we should cover Jeff's childhood experience. And at Verissima Productions, we happen to specialize in personal histories, video biographies. So we had a field day with that, and he had these fabulous professional photos that your dad had taken, which really added to it. So that's the second part. The first part is immediately, the short answer. And Raquel met with us. We were connected by a mutual acquaintance, Ken Hausman, and we met the first time, and she said, I don't have any money, and I've never made a film, but we need to make this. And so we spent about 3 or 4 years getting it going, but within the first week, I called Susie Walsh at Center for Independent Documentary, and she said, what's the name of it? And I said, SPACE TORAH. And she said, I love it. I called Austin DeBesch, he said, I'm all in. I called Billy Novick, he said, I'll do the music. And Greg McCleary at Heart Punch said, I'll deal with the sound and we'll work with you. And then I knew we could do something, even though it took a couple of years from that.
So, Jeff, in some sense, this film really tells two stories. One story is the story of Jeff as an astronaut and the repair of the Hubble and all the work that you've done in space. And the other story is Jeff as a Jew. And I want to know, did you ever see before this experience, those two stories intertwining as they so obviously have? And how has it affected you afterwards, the intertwining of those two stories?
Well, I think what started to really be clear to me, and as I explained in the movie, moving to a more conservative synagogue, I was learning a lot of things which I hadn't known before about the Jewish traditions and heritage. And at the same time of, being enmeshed in this, thousands of years old tradition, I was working on something which for me represented the future, space flight. And the juxtaposition of this, the old and the new, intrigued me, and that's why I didn't view them as being separate. I mean, they're together because, as I said again, we're not robots, we're human beings. It's part of my tradition, which I take with me.
Some people say that I've heard astronauts say before that just going into space and really seeing the Earth underneath you and all its different, all its variety is in itself a religious experience. And I wonder if you've had that feeling and how that strikes you, either as a person or as a Jew.
I was at the first Earth Day in 1970. I know all about the Earth being finite and fragile, but there's a difference between knowing something intellectually and experiencing it, and from the perspective of an astronaut, realizing that on the other side of my window, or when I was outside the other side of my space helmet, there's a vacuum. I'm dead in a few tens of seconds if I'm not protected. And the whole almost all the entire universe is hostile to life. And that's what makes, I think, astronauts looking back at the Earth, it is something special, because you realize the miracle of life and how special it is. At the same time, recognizing that the Earth is a finite system, which when you're in space and you're in a closed system inside your spacecraft, you realize how important it is to look after your atmosphere, to look after not get too hot, too cold. But for most people, it's very hard to look at the Earth in that way, as a closed system. And more people could do that. We might see a way to solve some of our problems.
Right. And with the current UN conference going on, this is a very appropriate time to be thinking about that. So, Rob, we know a lot about you as a filmmaker, but we don't know much about you as a Jew. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you entered this film, and as not only a filmmaker, but as a Jewish guy, and how it has left you, what kind of journey as a Jew it took you on.
I guess the best way to answer that, the most direct way, is that when Shaul found that Torah, and we should give a shout out to Shaul, Rabbi Osadchi, who so much wanted to be here tonight. He's really the ultimate star that got it. Anyway, when he found that mini Torah, and then when Jeff took it up, they were hoping it would influence people at some point, some way. And Jeff and I got together for coffee a couple of weeks ago, and I told Jeff one of those people was me, because I was born Jewish, but I was not raised with any faith tradition. And it just so happens that Pam and I have been making films. Jewish subjects keep coming to us for like the past 20, 30 years. And so, and this just kind of pushed me over the top. And I was so taken by the majesty of the Torah, I guess. I'm going to slip in a 20-second story. One of the great problems we had was, how do you make a mini Torah stand up? So you could videotape it. There's a credit in there for Jim Pasopoulos for scenic construction, Pasadopoulos for scenic construction, and that was the stand that made the Torah. But the majesty, all those sequences where we had this amazing footage, which is free from NASA. You can go on their website, 4K footage, this glorious footage, and the Torah seemed to fit right in there. And so as I was editing the film, and Billy's music was a part of it, I just found I was tremendously emotionally touched. And Pam and I joined a show about 3 years ago, when we were in the middle of working on the film.
So this film really did take you on some kind of a Jewish journey.
Absolutely, and sort of continues to.
When you were talking to your filmmaker friends and you told them you were making a film about a Torah that went into space and an astronaut, did you find any skepticism? Tell me about it.
Well, one friend in particular said, "What, Jews in space? What's that?" It really ran the gamut, because a lot of people just immediately thought, "Oh, that's magnificent. I want to hear about this," and other people just kind of, it was they were skeptical. Exactly.
Jeff, I want to ask you sort of a similar question. Like, what's it like to be a Jewish astronaut? I mean, you're really among most of the astronauts are not Jewish. There are some. Do you ever face anti-Semitism in the astronaut?
Never. In all honesty, religion was not something we really talked much about. We're training for space flight. With some of the people, we're closer friends, and some people I knew what their religions were. Most people I didn't, but it was just not something that normally came up.
What about your
But I will say, there were a few pictures up there of my friend Claude Nicollier, who's a Swiss astronaut, and I needed somebody to be the cameraman when I was performing the ceremony of reading from the Torah, and Claude we've actually flown together 3 times, which I think is a record, and he's very close friends, so I asked him if he would do it, and so he took all the pictures, and when we finished, he said, "Jeff, I have absolutely no idea what you were just doing, but it looked very impressive." And that's sort of typical. It was never something we had talked about before, but he accepted it, and I've never had a problem with being Jewish.
Well, what about the rest of the crew? Were they curious about the Torah? Did you get questions?
Well, actually...
well, let me just finish. Did any of them mind, in a way, your kind of focus on this little object as when you had a lot of work to do?
Well, no, I have to explain. That flight, it was my 5th flight. It was what we call a 2-shift operation. We had to keep stuff going 24 hours a day. So of the 7 people, when I was doing the ceremony, 4 of them were asleep. And so Claude and I were awake, and then Franklin Chang Diaz, another good friend, was down in the middeck doing something else. So really it was very quiet, and there was no problem. I was always sensitive to not imposing any of what I was doing with this on other people, which is why, as I say, I was spinning the dreidel. I wasn't planning to make a public statement about it. They called up and asked, so I did it. And also, because it was a 2-shift flight, we actually had sleeping compartments where you could slide the door shut, so it would keep the noise out, and one shift could sleep while the other was working. And I would put a little mezuzah on. You can't nail them to the door, by the way, in space. That's not a good idea. So I used Velcro on the door of the sleep compartment, but I wanted to remove it in the morning because I didn't want to leave that for someone else, because we had to share the sleep compartments. But I guess one day we were busy and I forgot. And when the other shift got up, we overlapped for about an hour, and the guy who had been in using that bunk came over to me and said, "Hey Jeff, that was a nice move, leaving the mezuzah in there." And I said, "Oh yeah, it's Scott Horowitz, of course." And so we left it in there for both of us, for the rest of the flight.
So you hot bunk on the shuttle?
Oh yeah.
Oh. Do you change the bedclothes?
Right. No.
Or no? Honestly, I want an honest answer. Do you change the bedclothes?
We have a little sleeping bag, which, believe it or not, is good enough to last for 2.5 weeks, which is when we were up there for that. You don't have quite as strong a sense of smell when you're up in space for various physiological reasons, which is probably a good thing. We also don't have a shower.
Oh. Rob, so this whole film, it kind of has a trajectory that's headed toward one scene, and that scene is Jeff reading from Bereshit, from the Torah. So how do you kind of construct a film that has one main scene? That seems to me like an extremely difficult job. Was there a temptation to make it last a lot longer than it did? Could you have?
I love that question, Paula. Thank you. One of the nice things about this film was we didn't have any particular length that it had to be. We had initially thought we could go for an hour documentary, broadcast documentary, but there wasn't enough there to do that. But as I said, we had this moment and we wanted to build to the moment. And then there's literally coming back down to earth. And to me, the real payoff of the film is when the kids are reading the Torah with the Lador Vador. And I can slip in a little plug for Billy, because not only did he write an amazing music track, but he plays the clarinet. And it's that voice of the clarinet while the kids are reading. So that's the real payoff. And then, as I said, there was the backstory of how does a Jewish kid from New York become an astronaut that Raquel was in. So basically, there's 4 chapters. There's Jeff becomes an astronaut. There's the Jewish experience and the initial stuff he took, ending with fixing the Hubble and the Hanukkah. Then there's, the other thing is we wanted to save we were tempted to start the rocket at the very beginning of the film. Here we go, blast off. But we wanted to save that until you had more of a grounding, and so it would be more an exciting thing. And when Jeff, as you may have noticed, we did the interview with Jeff and Shaul right out here in the lobby, because we wanted a sort of planetary experience, and Austin DeBesh, who couldn't be here tonight, did an amazing job of lighting it. And they started reminiscing together. And that was the point where we were able to blast off. And then the real meaning, to me, the footage is not great, but when Jeff's with the kids, you know, that's the benefit of what happened up there is back here.
You know, Jeff, one of the nicest things about the film is the way it shows you in the context of your community and how you involved both synagogues, the rabbis, the kids, and others from the synagogue in this project. So how important was that to you, and how did that evolve?
Well, the synagogue is a community, and you know, many of our friends, we had friends from the astronaut office, we had friends from the synagogue. My wife taught at school, we had friends from there, but you know, the friends from the synagogue, it was a real community, and they were very interested in what I was doing. And you know, as you heard in the film, a whole caravan went down from the synagogue, went down to watch the launch, and so it was the last Shabbos before I went into quarantine. As they said, we had a nice little ceremony to wish me well, and also the communications back then with the ground are not quite as sophisticated as they are up in the space station now, where you can basically pick up an internet phone and call anybody anytime you want. But I could send messages, text messages down to the ground, and I was able to communicate with them as well as what I did, you know, from up there, wishing everybody a good Shabbos. But I knew they wouldn't get that until much later.
Rob, one of the things I was really curious about was why you started the film with Anne Bernay's quote that no Jew would ever become an astronaut. I mean, it adds a little kind of spice to the film and a little bit of irony in it. So, I really
I should say something
it.
before Rob
Sure.
answers why he put it in, is how that first
Yeah, I was
came
going to
about,
answer for
because-
you,
Yeah.
but it's Jeff's story. You should tell it.
you could talk about why you wanted to start the film with
No,
it.
but you should tell the story.
How it actually happened was I had put in an application to be an astronaut, and nothing much was happening. My wife, Barbara, is a librarian. She reads lots of books. Living room one day, we were living out in Weston. I was working at MIT. She bursts out laughing. You know, what's so funny? You got to come over and read this. And it was that passage from the book about, you know, no Jew. I think it was also about New York Jews in particular, ever had been or will be an astronaut. And you know, I had just put in my application. So I did. I wrote her a letter actually after I got selected, and she said if they ever did bring out a second edition of the book, she might have to, you know, make some alterations. But there, I'll pass it over to you. Is why you wanted to use that
Thanks,
quote.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the I don't mean to say mitzvahs are just little miracles. For a film like this to work, a lot of pieces have to just kind of fall together. And Jeff told us that story, and then actually Greg at Heart Punch, he said, you know, this film needs to have a sense of humor, needs to have a little levity. And we listened to that, and we just happened to have that picture of the video of Jeff giving the peace sign and smiling, which is kind of juxtaposed perfectly with that quote. And we thought it was a really appropriate place to start, because you got this notion of this Torah going on the shuttle, and what's up with that? And let's start with the concept of what about a Jew being an astronaut, which for a lot of people. And this also gives me a chance just to hook onto this. I realized watching it on the big screen for the first time just what a phenomenal interview Jeff was, and how that same enthusiasm that you had when you first saw Saturn's rings, and you know, it's still there. And a shout out to my partner Pam Cooper, who did the interview, and the rapport between the two of them, I think was, you know, it's a long, 25 minutes is a long time for basically one person. But it to me, I hope people felt that way. It just stays fresh, you know, because it just there's so much enthusiasm and maybe even joy in it. So
I told you I've seen it 5 times.
Oh, man.
And I really thoroughly enjoyed it when I was watching it. So, yeah, it's your enthusiasm. But I wonder, so has Anne Bernays seen this film, and what does she think of having her quote?
I've not been in touch, so I don't
think
know.
it's going to be really interesting. Definitely send it to her. I thought it added a bit of irony to the film, which all films need. So I really thought it was a brave choice, maybe, and it could be seen as controversial, but really interesting. So there were a couple of things outside the film that really resonated with me, and it was, in some sense, the tradition of reading from the Bible in space, which of course started in 1968 with the astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders. And this is in the midst of a very divisive and horrible time in American history when they read from Genesis, from Bereshit, which you read from. And I understand exactly why you did it, because if the schedule of the shuttle shifted, then you would have prepared a portion and have to really hurry to prepare another one. But it kind of followed on that. And that was, I recall that. I'm old enough to remember that and how moving and amazing it was. And then the other thing is the other tiny Torah that was brought into space by Ilan Ramon, the Israeli astronaut, who received it from an astrophysicist named Joachim Joseph, who actually was given it by a rabbi from Holland in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And he used it and had a bar mitzvah, his bar mitzvah, in the barracks in Bergen-Belsen. The rabbi did not survive, and he asked the little boy to keep the Torah with him and to tell his story, which of course he did. And then, of course, the same shuttle, the Columbia, exploded and no trace was ever found of the Torah. And I wondered if either of these stories really struck you as part of a space tradition of something so new and such an intrinsic part of modernity, hearkening back to the words of antiquity.
Well, I knew Elon, wonderful man. We also spent quite a bit of time with his wife, both before and after, tragically, he and his crew were lost in the Columbia disaster. I think what motivated him was similar to what motivated me. I mean, this was a part of his heritage. Of course, it had the tragic connection with the Holocaust, which is, a whole nother dimension. But certainly, being Israeli and that, the Holocaust and its effect on the Jewish people, but the fact that this Torah survived and came through the hands of a scientist, and I mean, it's an incredible story. Such a tragedy that both he and the Torah were lost. But I think it was ultimately the same motivation, that this was part of his heritage, and to bring this with him was a demonstration, an affirmation, and a desire to pass it on so that other people would know about it.
But even in 1968, they had these 3 astronauts had such a hard time figuring out what they were going to say to the world. And, we know that particular mission, Apollo 8, really set the stage for reaching the moon. And they had such a hard time, and then they all agreed and decided to
You can't
read
go wrong with the
Ber-
beginning, especially when it's the first time you do something.
Yes.
Start with the beginning.
Yes.
Can I just jump in a quick
Absolutely.
minute? Because there are a
I'm so
couple of
sorry.
other people who just should be mentioned. Pam, for getting all the research going, helping to structure the film, and suggesting there should be a female narrator. Jill Jacobs for being that fabulous female narrator. And Shady Hartshorn, who sat with me late into many nights stitching the little pieces together, and Arnie Harchick, who polished it all up so it sparkled and shined and made the amazing job of this really old funky footage and making it sort of fresh and new and colorful. So just wanted to mention those guys as well.
And as long as we're thanking people, I certainly thank Rob and Pam and the whole crew, all the people who worked on this, who really put a lot of their own time and effort into it, and especially Rachel, because she made it happen. I was, as she said, I gave a talk at the rabbinical school, and she heard it and came up to me afterwards. Where can I find this? And I said, well, it's just on my computer. And she just was unwilling to accept that that's the way it was going to stay. She asked if I would consider having a movie made about it. And I mean, I didn't know who she was. Does she know anything about movies? So my response was, well, if it can be done professionally. And as you heard, Rachel had never made a movie, didn't know anything about movie professionals, luckily found Rob and his crew, and the result is here. So thanks to all of you, and Rachel especially.
Well, yeah.
So we still have some more time, and you have sent up through this iPad some great questions, and you can continue to do that. One of the questions is, when the little Torah returned to Earth, did it have to go into quarantine?
We did not have to go into quarantine. We went into quarantine before a flight because we don't want to get sick when we go up there, but we were not being exposed to any extraterrestrial life forms or germs, which, when things came back from the moon for the first time, until they convinced themselves that the moon is a dead body, they all had to go into quarantine. But we didn't have to do that coming back from the shuttle or the space station, because you're in the same environment that you took with you, so no problem there.
Jeff, one person in the audience would like to know a little bit about your current project on the Mars 2020 rover, the MOXIE
Sure.
experiment.
Someday, I don't know whether it's my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren's generation, someday we're going to go to Mars, because everything we've learned about it, it's just, the more we know, the more fascinating a place it was, and perhaps still is. Assuming that you want to come back once you go there, you're going to need a rocket to take off, and that rocket burns fuel using oxygen, and roughly about 30 tons worth of oxygen to get off the surface of Mars with a crew of 6, sort of like what you saw in the movie The Martian. It takes to get 1 ton of anything onto the surface of Mars, you have to launch about 12 or 13 tons off the surface of the Earth, because into Earth orbit, propellant, motors, all that stuff. And lots of stuff that when we go to the moon or Mars, we have to make on Earth. All the manufactured stuff. We can't make computers or rockets or spacesuits on Mars, not now anyway. But dumb old oxygen, I mean, to take 30 tons of dumb oxygen all the way from the Earth to Mars, when you could make it on Mars, it doesn't make sense. And that's what we're demonstrating. We have an experiment that's actually taking the Mars atmosphere, which is mostly carbon dioxide. We compress it, we electrolyze it, just like in high school chemistry. You electrolyze water, you make hydrogen and oxygen. And you can do that with carbon dioxide, and we extract the oxygen, and it's working. So, it's been great. I never thought I'd be doing anything on Mars, but it sure has been exciting.
So has Mars 2020 told us anything more about whether there is or was life on Mars?
Well, not yet, but for the very first time, I think the primary goal of this mission, producing oxygen is great, but what the most important thing is that they're actually collecting samples, and we've landed in a place where the geology is such that if there ever was single-cell life on Mars that left fossils, those fossils could be preserved in these samples. And the samples will then eventually be brought back to the Earth for detailed examination. So that's the most exciting part of it. But the oxygen is pretty cool too.
Sounds very cool. Now, Jonah, age 9, has a question, which is, what are the differences between inside the capsule and outside the capsule?
There's a lot more air inside than outside. That's the first rule of being up there in space. If you're going to go outside, you have to put on a spacesuit. And inside, you can be in shirt sleeves and move around and do lots of stuff very easily. But in order to go outside, which of course sometimes we have to do if we have to fix something, but you have to be in one of these big bulky spacesuits. So it's a completely different environment. And as I said before, it makes you realize how hostile most of the universe is to life, because we have to go to these extreme measures in order just to survive when we're up in space, because it's such an unforgiving environment. Anything that goes wrong, a human error, a mechanical failure, things can get bad in a hurry.
So we have two really interesting questions. One is, I want to be an astrophysicist, but I don't want to go to space. What would you say to convince me to become an astronaut?
I don't have to convince you. Hey, being an astrophysicist is a very nice career. That's what I was planning to do before I became an astronaut. And listen, if you don't want to be an astronaut, there's plenty of people who do, so don't worry about it.
And does fear ever play a part before take-up or before doing repairs outside the spacecraft?
Oh, well,
like leaving your family to go up in space, knowing that, well, driving is pretty dangerous on Earth. I don't know what the comparison between an accident in space and one on the highway is. I don't know what the statistics are, but sounds to me like it'd be more dangerous.
Well,
in
as I say,
space.
the environment of space flight is very hazardous, and how you react to that, you know, when people ask about fear, that's a very personal thing. You'll get different responses from different astronauts. You'll find a few people who say they don't really like launches. They love being in space, but launching is dangerous. No question, it can be dangerous. There are many things that can go wrong that if we do the right thing, we can actually correct a problem and carry on, and we train and we train. And so I was fully confident that if anything happened that I could do something about, we would do the right thing. And of course, there's many things that can go wrong that you can't do anything about, so why worry? I'm sorry to sound glib about it. It's you know, you have to have the right personality, and you know, I remember riding out to the launch pad before my first flight, and you see this huge rocket sitting up there, and you know it's all filled with explosive propellants, and that is not the time to be asking yourself, do I really want to do this? You know, that was a decision I made back when I was 10 years old, and you know, what I wanted to do was sit back and enjoy the ride, because it's quite a ride.
So do astronauts ever talk about that? Ever talk about their secret fears?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
how? What do they say?
One of my crewmates told me, I don't like launches, too dangerous. And other people I know, after the Challenger accident, there were a few people who said, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. It's a personal thing. And being an astronaut it can be tough on the family as well, because you know I'm having the fun of going up into space, and they have to watch, and particularly after having seen accidents occur, it can get very personal.
Rob, do you have a desire now to make more films about space?
Well, absolutely. I actually, something that Jeff and I shared that we talked about a little bit as we both got exposed to Flash Gordon, and we were both taken by it. He just progressed a little further with that dream than I managed to. But this gives me a great segue. I started to thank Pam for getting all the research going, and it was Heather Merrill that got so many of those phenomenal images that we used.
I hadn't seen those for 40, 50 years. It was great.
Oh, the Flash Gordon and the magazines, and that was really a fun part of it. But knowing that there's this NASA footage that's so astonishing. I mean, when I was editing that stuff, I just felt like I was transported. And seeing it on this screen, you lose formatting. It's not exactly the correct formatting, but the depth of the stars. And I also wanted to complete the loop with what Jeff said about Raquel, because the thing we have in common there is Raquel came out of the crowd out of nowhere, and somehow Jeff believed her. And she came to us, and Pam and I believed her, and I was talking to Raquel's husband, Gil, and he said, yeah, she has that effect. And the 4 years of making the film were, 3 of them were Raquel banging the drum and getting in touch with all of those names, one of which was yours, Paula, thank you, who contributed. And it was actually right here when we shot the first interview 3 years ago. That's all we could afford at that point. We could afford to shoot one interview with Jeff and Joel, and then Raquel went out and brought some more in, and so that should not be lost.
I really want to, Raquel, is your mic still live? I'm sort of breaking, or can you talk really loud, or come and speak through my mic? That'd be fine. Okay, because what I really want to ask you is, you're an educator, and I know that part of your vision for this film, because you told me, is to really use it as education. So we have maybe 4 minutes left, and I think it's really important to hear what you think the value of this for children in general and Jewish children in particular as an educational tool is. What's your vision for that?
So there are several things in this story that
Rael,
really
come
into the light.
Come down here.
Here you go.
Because you sparkle.
Yes. Yeah, I'm dressed for the occasion. Yeah, there are several things in this story that that really struck me for everyone. One of them is the dream of a child. It started with somebody. What is your dream? What do you want to do in your life? Think about it, and the sky is not the limit. Think about anything that you want to do. Literally, it's not the limit. The second thing in the story that when I asked Jeff about his parents or his first childhood experience, he spoke about his father taking him to the planetarium. So it was also a message for parents. What are we doing with our children? Are we spending time with them? Your father was very busy, but he made effort to spend time with you. There was also the educator, the 3rd grade educator. When I asked Jeff, is there any educator that influenced you? Immediately said, my 3rd grade teacher. And it wasn't a science teacher. It was a teacher that just noticed you.
In 3rd grade, they teach everything.
Yeah, but she was just noticing what you like to do, and she brought you the right book. And go on, like it's the spiritual leader that kind of asks you, would you take it? Or there is all of these people, the community member that all came together. So for me, this is a very important messages for all of us as a community. When we are raising children, who is coming together is the ecosystem of raising a confident, strong, positive citizen for our societies. So for me, this is like very important message that I want to share with children, that I've been already sharing it in the past year with children, with parents, with educators, and with the wider community. It's really to think about all of these things that come together. Together we can make great things.
What about, in particular, Jewish children, though? As a Jewish educator, what do you see the kind of educational points are?
So one of the things, it's SPACE TORAH, and the idea that an astronaut decided to take with him this ancient book of thousands of years, because there are so many values that are very appropriate to our generation today. And when you brought it together, it's a message for people that maybe are not looking yet at like the Torah and the values that it's bringing, to think about, maybe I should look in this book. I'm a scientist or I can do other great things, but there are some values in this ancient tradition. And I want to share. But it's not just for Jewish children. I really wanted this. The reason that we're doing it here at the Science Museum, I don't think it's only a Jewish story. I don't want it just to be for Jewish kids. I think it's for every citizen, for every human being, to think about what is our traditions, what are the values that we are bringing to the world, what am I proud of, and I can bring it. And I can tell you, when I received my citizenship here in America, not too far from here also, the judge said, bring your own tradition, bring who you are, but also come and take the American values. And for me, this was such a powerful message. We are a country of immigrants. We're all here together. We come with different traditions, but when we come here together, we can still be proud of our tradition, but also be proud of the American values. And for me, this was a very important message.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the Boston Jewish Film Festival for this really wonderful film, awesome film. James.
And while we're waiting on James, thank you to the Museum of Science for hosting us.
Absolutely.
What a thrill to be in here and see the film up there. So thanks so much, James. And to the BJFF and Lauren and Wes for making it look so good.
Let's keep it going. Let's have another hand for our amazing guests tonight. Thank you to all four of you for being here, sharing this amazing conversation, these insights with us, and this really special, amazing film. It means a lot. And a huge thank you to our friends at the Boston Jewish Film Festival for asking us to be a part of this. We thank all of you for joining us and spending your Thursday night with us. There's still a lot of festival left to go, I hear, about 10 days. So make sure you check out the incredible screenings and events that they still have planned. And we hope to see you back here at the museum soon. Have a wonderful night. Please exit up the steps and through the rear. We'll see you soon.